Hello again, and welcome to the Author Roundup. This special segment of the Book Connection show showcases emerging indie authors who join us for a discussion of their newly published books. Join us for a conversation with our next guest author. Hi there, thank you for joining me today. This is Author Roundup, and I am Emma, your host for this episode. I am joined with a guest named Dr. Robert Littlefield. He is a professor at the University of Central Florida and a 40-plus year member of Lions International, the world's largest service organization with 1.4 million lions in 200 countries and territories around the world. As a lion, Dr. Littlefield has held leadership positions at the club, the district, and international levels. He is an advocate for the preservation of historical information about Lions International as a record of humanitarian assistance and as an inspiration to those who value community service. And he is here to discuss his latest publication, Resilience and Renewal, the story of Lions International and the crisis of COVID-19. Please welcome Dr. Littlefield. Hi, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you for being here today. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about your book? It was published earlier this year or recently, correct?
Yes, in February.
Oh, February. Okay. Well, can you tell us about it?
Yes, this is the story of Lions International and how it demonstrated resilience during the crisis of COVID-19 and emerged from the crisis in a state of renewal, ready to take on its mission of service to the world in the future. It's really a story of over 50 lions that I interviewed who were decision makers from executives to the managers to lions around the world who shared their stories of how they were confronted by the crisis, how they dealt with it personally, how they dealt with it as clubs, as an organization, and what they learned from the process. It's really an inspiring story. I really am looking forward to talking about it with you today.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that little introduction. So you've been involved with Lions International for over 40 years, correct?
Yes, I joined Lions in 1984 in
Okay,
Fargo, North Dakota.
okay.
And after being involved at the club level, I learned more about the international organization and I wanted to pursue some leadership. So I was a district governor for the eastern half of North Dakota. Then I was a council chair for Saskatchewan, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And then in 2014, I ran for the international board and was elected in Toronto to serve 2 years on the international board. And then following that, I served on the Lions Clubs International Foundation board as a trustee for an additional 3 years. So I've been involved at all levels. And I think because of that, I knew the organization quite well. And I
Mhm.
also had contact with a lot of Lions around the world. So it just naturally came together.
Okay, and so what inspired the idea for this book at this point within your journey with the organization, and why have the subject of COVID and how it relates to the organization? What inspired an idea to write an actual book about the organization and its involvement in crisis of COVID-19?
Well, as a member of Lions, when this crisis occurred, and it really was a global crisis, significant crisis,
Hmm.
understanding that Lions started in 1917 as a service organization where people work in groups together in their communities to help people in need. There's a lot of direct contact with people in need. And as you learn about the organization as an international organization, we travel to different areas, we speak, we do training seminars, we work with people and developing their projects. So when COVID stopped everything and
Yeah,
stopped us from meeting, it really threatened the very purpose of our organization. I mean,
yeah.
how would we provide service? What would we do? And I had the belief that the reason why lions were going to survive this crisis was because we are people who have agency. We want to do things to make the world a better place. And like water around a rock, we have to figure out how do we get through this? What are we going to do? And so
Yeah.
my hunch was that we would find a way, and I wanted to find the stories of people who were in the room when it happened, so to speak, the
Mhm.
leaders. What were they doing? How were they managing this? How were they learning from each other and dealing with it? So I
Mhm.
wanted to find that out from a lion's perspective. And as a professor of risk and crisis communication, strategic communication, and decision making, I had a
Mhm.
natural interest in bringing the theories that I have been taught and also that I teach and see if those theories play out in the real world. The thing that was unique about this particular crisis was that I was able to talk to people while we were still dealing with it. Usually,
Mhm.
when historians write about things, they write about the past and they gather information and they write about it. I was talking with people who were dealing with it as it happened, and that's really
Mhm.
what makes this a unique story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so for listeners who are not familiar, what can you elaborate on Lions International and what makes its mission of service unique on a global scale?
Yes, Lions International is the world's largest service organization, as you said, with 1.4 million lions in over 200 countries and territories around the world. It started in 1917 in Chicago, Illinois. Our founder, Melvin Jones, brought together a group of business clubs and said, we're not going to get very far if we don't start helping other people. And so
Hmm.
this inspiration to be involved in the community was really at the center of Lions. And initially, when Lions started, it was right during the end of World War I and the start of what was called the Spanish flu, which was a pandemic of its own kind. And so Lions naturally got involved in providing service and assistance in communities.
Hmm.
But it was in 1925, actually 100 years ago, that Helen Keller came to the Lions Convention and called on the Knights to take on the cause of blindness, to be Knights
Oh,
of the
wow.
Blind in the fight against blindness. And Lions embraced this concept. And so for most of the 20th century, the whole idea of preventing blindness or helping people who were blind was a primary focus of Lions clubs. But then in 1968 and beyond, we began growing globally,
Mhm.
and we found that there were other causes: diabetes, the environment, hunger, childhood cancer. We had humanitarian needs, disaster relief. And so Lions became this unique organization because it's made up of about 49,000 Lions clubs all around the world, and every club shares this common perspective, but they get to serve their community and area in their own way. And so we're
Mhm.
very unique that way, and that it's a very decentralized organization that has leaders who serve to motivate and train going up. So what Lions as a global organization is, we had Lions clubs everywhere that there was the pandemic. Lions clubs were in communities, and they saw there were still people who had needs that
Mhm.
needed to be met. They couldn't just, lock themselves away. So Lions got involved, and that's really the Lions organization is every club has its own structure, but we're tied together
Mhm.
into this global organization.
Okay. And so the COVID-19 pandemic obviously disrupted life everywhere and Lions was no exception. What were some of the earliest challenges the organization faced as a crisis as it like began to unfold? I think you elaborated, but
Well, I'm happy to talk about it because it had effects at every level. Let's
right.
start at the club levels.
Okay.
Clubs normally meet regularly. They meet,
Yeah.
plan their service projects. So Lions were told you cannot meet. and were
Yeah.
no longer able to meet. So they lost contact with each other. And of course, everybody was worried about themselves because we didn't know a lot about this virus. It was
Yeah.
seen. And so, somebody could carry it and not even know. So clubs stopped meeting. Well, when the clubs stop meeting, they can't plan projects. They can't do fundraisers. They can't do the things that they normally do to be able to help people in the community. So it
Hmm.
challenged clubs at that level.
Yeah.
At the district and multiple district level, you have leaders who can't meet, can't reach out, can't go to the places where they need to go. So they were stopped. And then our international directors and our president, our executive officers, they travel all around the world serving as motivational speakers and leaders with all of our initiatives. They were grounded. And
Hmm.
so the big challenge was, how do we contact each other? How do we network so that we can continue to do what we're doing? And that's
Hmm.
where we had some really innovative and creative grassroots lions who said, all right, we can use social media, we can
Yeah.
use Zoom meetings, we can do webinars, and started planning these events and activities where they would have the international officers come and have a webinar, and thousands of lions would come to the webinar because they wanted to know, what are we going to do? And
Hmm.
so it was that challenge of just communication was one big challenge. Another, of course, is that we provide grants to clubs around the
Hmm.
world so that they can do service projects in their local areas. And when you have to fundraise, fundraising is much more effective when it's done one to one and in person. And so we had to come up with new ways of fundraising to be able to generate the money that was needed to provide the services. Some examples like, normally you would think of a Lions Club having a pancake supper or a spaghetti supper or a pancake breakfast or a spaghetti supper or something. And what they ended up doing was they would go out to the street, they'd have a grill, and you could drive up and you could get a burger or you could buy dinners, or you could do things. And they did that to generate the money, so then they could provide they still had needs. People needed food, people needed supplies. The
Hmm.
Lions were creative, but they had to figure out, how do we do this if we can't do it together the way we
Hmm.
always have done it?
Hmm. And so you mentioned before that you interviewed more than 50 leaders for this book.
Yes. Mhm.
What common threads did you find in how they responded to the uncertainty and disruption during that time?
Well, at first, everyone took into account, how is this going to affect me and what
Yeah.
I'm doing? I can give you a couple of anecdotal stories. Our president was in the Middle East visiting Lebanon. He was traveling and he was stopped from getting off his plane because when he landed, they thought, because the pilots on the plane were Chinese, that automatically they were going to be spreading this disease. So he finally was able to get there, and he went back ultimately to our headquarters in Oak Brook, but he couldn't get back to his home country in Korea for several months because they had been blocked traveling. So
Yeah.
so all of our officers were in different parts of the world in this South Pacific area. One was getting ready to go to Europe. One was in Kentucky planning a conference. One was in Canada. So each of them had to figure, okay, what's going on with me and my immediate family. We always look
Yeah.
at that circle first, but
Absolutely.
immediately the contact was out. What are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And so the common thread is that after first taking account for yourself, then they
Hmm.
started looking out, okay, what are we going to do for our organization? How are we going to help Lions? How are we going to get the message out? And so from the executive level, they
Hmm.
were thinking about the welfare of the overall organization. That was a theme. They were always kind of looking out, how is this going to affect us? And
Hmm.
most of the people that I interviewed, almost every person was a person who, when asked on a scale, do you like to take charge or do you like to let others take charge? lions are people who like to do things. They want
Mhm.
to, let's solve this problem. And so
Yeah.
that kind of natural theme came out. I think another theme, if you want, like what was common among them, is the need to listen to each other and to trust each other. The
Mhm.
executive officers had to listen to the managers because the managers were talking to the local lions. And
Right.
that organizational listening was something that really helped because what it did is it collapsed the organization. The hierarchy was gone because when you were on a screen, you had everybody on the screen, and you have the vice president there, and you have a leader here, and you've got another person from another part of the world there, and you have all these different people interacting and working, kind of talking together. It
Yeah.
it really brought out the theme that we need to serve. How are we
Mhm.
going to serve? And that is the theme I think that came through from everyone, is that we needed to find a way to be true to our mission. And if we focus on service, it can also be service to our own lions. I mean, there were a lot of lions who were sick, who couldn't get out. We have a lot of older members, and so as clubs worried about their own lions, they helped them. They helped in the community. So I think the theme was we need to be true to our mission. We need to be creative. We need to do things in different ways. We can still accomplish our objectives. And I think the trust that we can listen to each other and we'll do things that we don't have to necessarily be in charge of it, but we can be helping by
Mhm.
reinforcing. I think all of that came through.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that you were interviewing these members while it was happening,
Yes.
or did you?
I started my interviews in 2022. So
Okay.
some areas of the world were coming out of it, but there were
Right.
still a lot. Like I am someone as a leader in the association. I travel, and so I was still doing a lot, as much travel as I could, but you'd wear masks, and so we
Yeah.
there are still there was still a lot of concern about COVID going on. The vaccinations had just come out. We were just, trying to reopen society, and in some parts it was faster than in other parts. So these people that I interviewed were still in that mindset of how are we functioning. They weren't fully back, to the pre-COVID days of what they were
Yeah.
doing. And so it was clear in their minds. And I think that was something um, that was helpful because they could think of the things that they had been doing. And I was asking them
Yeah.
questions about their own lives and then what they were doing in the association, the organization, and what they thought the organization did well, what they thought maybe could have been done better, and what were some lessons learned.
Okay. And how are these interviews laid out in your book? How did you go about with the structure of your book?
Well, one of the things that I wanted to do was to give every person I interviewed a chance for a moment in the sun, so to speak, that I would take a something that they said that was particularly meaningful or pertinent to what I was writing about and include it in a box in the text. So as you read through the book, you will find these highlighted texts from the people who I interviewed sharing their perspective about something that they did or that inspired them, or
Yeah.
something they learned. And so I think it's very interesting because in addition to the story that I'm telling, you're
Hmm.
you're getting insight into their stories, and each of them is featured throughout. So that's one way that I did it. And then, of course, I organized the material around the uh, group that I was discussing. The executive officers was one group because they were making leadership decisions for the whole association. And fortunately for me, as I started this, I was able to interview the person who was the immediate past president, the first vice president, second vice president, third vice president, and then I also interviewed four additional people who subsequently have become executive officers.
Oh.
So I have nine people who were the leaders at the top of the organization, getting their perspectives. That's really unique in any
Yeah.
kind of book. And so I organized all the material that they talked about. Then
Hmm.
I looked at the managers, the staff that were at the different divisions of Lions, and
Hmm.
each of those areas. And so I looked at how were they interacting within the organization. So I looked at the paid staff and
Hmm.
employees of the
Hmm.
organization. And then I interviewed Lions at the club and the district level. And so I have a group of those, and I featured one multiple district 35, which is Florida, and its surrounding. There are four other countries that are included with that: Bahamas, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. And that group and how they managed it so that I could actually get into some really good detail. And
Hmm.
then there was a group of like really innovative social media technical leaders who really introduced a lot to help the organization. So I grouped things based upon their level and tried to deal with the issues that they were dealing with.
Okay, very cool. Well, speaking of social media, I know obviously was a huge transition to digital platforms, as we all know, as a result of COVID-19. What were the unexpected advantages or long-term benefits for Lions International that emerged?
Well, that's a really good question. And first of all, I think that people who had access to those social platforms really were early adopters in the process because what they did is they took their knowledge and they helped to educate those that didn't have the knowledge. So, for example, I, as a university professor, was familiar with Zoom and with
Mhm.
online because we teach online classes. And so we often use
Right.
different platforms. And
Hmm.
so I was able to, as a member of my local club, was able to say, let's have a Zoom meeting and kind of see how everybody's doing. So I set up a Zoom and sent out the link and helped people over the phone and in certain ways so that they became more savvy. And I think that's one of the things that happened is those people who were innovators or early adopters really helped the organization because they educated
Hmm.
and that once people became more familiar, a little knowledge is dangerous.
Hmm.
I can tell a good story of a friend of mine in Canada who had two members of his club who were single and they weren't very tech savvy, but they wanted to learn more. And so in that rural community, he and his wife invited these two people to their home and they set up a meeting on their television so they could watch it and see it. And they got so enamored with it that they said, we've got to do something. Let's buy iPads and donate them to the local senior citizen centers so that they can be in touch with their families. So from that introduction to social media,
Yeah.
what it could do, it prompted people to make a decision that would help their local community. So I think that was one thing that they helped to educate and innovate, and I think that was helpful. And then
Hmm.
I think as your question kind of is leading, how did these social platforms contribute to the success of the organization? What
Hmm.
happened was that webinars, for example, were
Hmm.
scheduled, and so they were regularly scheduled, bringing an officer into a panel discussion about how are we dealing with this, how are we functioning with our fundraising, what are some new service projects, how are people doing things. I mean, a group in India had a bus and they were able to get oxygen tanks and they fitted the bus up so that as people were waiting to get into the hospital, they could go onto the bus and get oxygen because that's a big issue. So they were able to secure the bus, secure the oxygen, and set up these portable stations where people could get access while they were waiting to get into a hospital. So I just think that the idea of sharing knowledge and connecting people was so important, and that really made a difference and helped in the long run. one final thing I think also is that we are spread out over large areas of land. So, for example, I'll use my own home district, Saskatchewan, North Dakota, and South Dakota. It's over 20 hours from the top to the bottom for
Mhm.
people getting together. So when we have meetings to plan things or do things, that means some people are driving as long as 9 hours one way to get to a meeting for maybe an evening or a day, and then they drive home. That's a waste of time. And
Yeah.
so what the COVID has done for Lions is that now we're using this hybrid. There are always lions like to be together because
Hmm.
there is a social dimension of sharing ideas and the friendships that we develop. And I'm looking forward to our international convention where I'll see friends from around the world. So in-person contact is important, but
Right.
we do a lot of planning and meeting. And it's so nice because you can get in and have a 2 hour meeting and you're sleeping in your own bed. And
Yeah.
you know, and I live in Florida now, and there are lions who travel like from Michigan to Florida, from New England to Florida. They come down in the winter and
Yeah.
their winters. Well, now they can keep attending their Lions Club meeting because they keep the link open, and so they can stay connected even when
Yeah.
they're not there. So I think that's one of the ways that Lions has changed so that we're using the technology to help us be more efficient and save time, and
Yeah.
also to share information and do trainings and things like that. I hope that
Yeah.
answered the
Yeah,
questions.
no, that did. Yeah, I feel like, yeah, obviously it's great to do in-person meetings, but yeah, if it's smarter, the 9 hour travel, oh my gosh,
Yes.
one way, that is crazy. Yeah, so thank goodness for Zoom and it's also nice hearing that you have so many people are on different levels, like leadership levels. And I think you mentioned it earlier that I feel like Zoom meetings, when you have all of these important people together, all the way from the top and all the way at the bottom, in a way that everyone, I'm sure their needs got met or heard faster because of, Zoom meetings, right?
Well, I think one of the things that Lions really missed was the personal contact and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
interacting. And there's an innovative strategy that was developed by Lions in Wisconsin, and they called it the Burmeister Virtual Bar. And every
Mhm.
Saturday night at 6 o'clock, they would open the bar and people and it wasn't it wasn't like a drinking bar,
Right,
obviously,
yeah. Just the
but
name is
the
cute.
name was, and
Yeah.
people would come to this place, and I participated at different points during the process.
Yeah.
At first, what they tried to do was to let everybody say something, like check in, like how are you doing, and everybody got.
Yeah.
Well, the groups were so large that they couldn't do that within the time frame. So that's when the experts said, well, let's break people into rooms. And so they took the number and they broke them into rooms of 6 to 8 people so that they could have like a 20 minutes or a half an hour of like more personal contact.
Yeah.
And then they'd bring
Oh,
them
that's
back
cool.
and they'd play games, they'd play trivia, they'd do things, they'd have maybe an inspirational message or something, and it
Hmm.
was just people and thousands of people would, honestly, it was a
That's
huge
so cool.
event. And people now, like when they go to conventions, of course you only saw the person on the screen that was this size,
Yeah.
and now when they get to a convention or meet in person, one of the people who was involved in a more significant way said she's always surprised because someone will come up and say, oh, I saw you at the Burmester virtual bar, and they'll be like 6 feet tall and she's kind of short, and she said, I didn't realize how tall you were,
Yeah.
because we should.
Everyone's in a little
Yeah,
square.
we should all have a box around us so that we can watch that. But the other thing that was kind of neat is that people really reached out to each other in emotional ways. One lion who talked about, that I interviewed, shared a story that he became aware of a lion whose spouse, also a lion, was a first responder, and
Mm.
she contracted COVID and died shortly before Christmas during that first year. And he felt so he said he wanted to reach out in a way. And so he and his family set up a Zoom on Christmas Eve and said, if you are affected in any way, or you are alone, or you just want to come and be together with other
Yeah.
Lions, you're welcome here. And a large group, I don't have the actual count, but it was a large number of people came together, and our incoming vice president, who would soon take office, came to that event and was sitting there next to other people who were all there because they were feeling that loss or feeling like they wanted just the connection. And I think
Mhm.
being able to be right next to somebody at a different level in the organization, but you
Yeah,
all were there because you cared about each other. And, kindness matters. It's a theme that we often carry in our service, that being kind to others is something that will help make the world a better place. And that's the goal
absolutely.
of Lions, is to
Yeah,
serve and to help make the world a better place.
right. Yeah. So as both a scholar and long-term member, how did this project bring your academic and service, or how did it bridge your academic and service-based identities, do you think?
Well, I came into this with my mindset of like, here's what constitutes resilience. Here,
Yeah.
here are the characteristics of renewal. Here's what I'm teaching in my classes. Let me look at the comments that I'm getting from people. You can imagine I had most of the interviews were 45 minutes to an hour in length. So when I had them transcribed, I've got binders
Oh,
of
I bet.
material, and hearing their stories. And so what for me, what this tells me is that theory is relevant to this organization's success, and
Hmm.
that if you want to be resilient, you have to have people who are competent. You have to have people who have agency or the ability to do something. You
Hmm.
need to have people who can make sense of a lot of different information and come to conclusions about it. And you have to have people who are sense givers, who can share information with others. That's the characteristic of resilience. People who are resilient can do those kinds of things. And that's the characteristics that I found in the people that
Hmm.
I interviewed. So I knew they were resilient. And of course, that was my thinking all along. I said, I
Hmm.
know lions. Lions want to do things. They are determined to be successful, to make the world a better place. They have a mission. So I was validated by
Hmm.
that information. But the part about renewal is when you look at the life cycle of a human, we're born, we go through adolescence, we mature, and at some point in time, we have to decide, are we going to keep trying to reinvent ourselves, to keep trying to do new things, to challenge ourselves, or are we just going to be satisfied to let other people do it? And
Hmm.
then the decision between renewal and decline is really the focus of where I was looking when I was doing this project, because I believed that when we went into the pandemic, we were in a state of renewal as an organization. We had opened up opportunities for younger members. We had started a new campaign to raise funds. We were generating a membership drive. We had all these ideas that we were looking for new voices,
Hmm.
empowerment, all this kinds of these things that I would characterize as renewal. And then COVID hit, which
Hmm.
we could have said, okay, we're done. Or
Yeah.
what are we going to do? And
Hmm.
it's that process of learning what happened and what are we going to do, staying positive and optimistic, uh, looking for ways to be ethical in our communications so that we're telling people the truth and what's going
Hmm.
on and trying to be helpful. Um, and the strength of leadership, where leaders are the ones that really can help to determine renewal. But what I learned, which is a lesson from this, is that renewal can come from all levels. We can have renewal at the local club level. We can have renewal in the intermediate levels of our organization. Our staff has the ability, our executive officers. So renewal is just not leader centered, which is
Yeah.
what the literature has said, that that leaders are the ones that help organizations renew. And I can validate that leaders, our leaders, did the right things that they needed to do. There was some at the beginning while they were trying to make sense. That was one of the things that people said is that, it takes an organization a little bit of time to really figure out what's going on. And COVID was so new and unfamiliar that our leaders, needed time to kind of connect with each other and figure out what are we going to do. But
Mhm.
once they got together and made sense of it, then they were sense givers and they were able to take it out. So I think this has just provided me with a wonderful example to use in
Mhm.
my classes to talk about
Mhm.
organizations. And that's one of the things that I hope people will take from this book. And that is that this isn't just a story about Lions International.
Mhm.
Lions International is the case study of an organization, a global organization, big organization that
Mhm.
with multiple levels that had to focus on its members, its purpose, and come up with a solution. Any organization that faces a crisis has to be able to trust its employees to be helpful and make sense and be ambassadors for the association. Our
Mhm.
stakeholders, all of the groups. I think that organizations across the board can learn from what Lions did and use that to help their organization if they're ever faced with a crisis like this.
Yeah. And so for the title of your book, you've mentioned obviously about resilience and renewal just now. So when did that title idea pop into your head? Was it before, during, or after? How did the title and subtitle come about?
Honestly, that's a really good question, and I'm happy to share it with you. I really thought the title of this was going to be The Stories Continue. Lions and the Challenges of COVID-19 was the rough working title that I used. I wrote a book about 5 years ago that I called Stories from the Heart, Lions Serving the World One Person at a Time. And I had about 1,000 people that contributed information for that book. And
Oh.
that book was focused more on what motivates a person to be a lion, what keeps
Mm.
them engaged in lionism, and why is it that most people who believe they're lions in their hearts will be a lion until they die. They can't imagine the world without them being a lion. So that's what the first was about. And I thought, well, I'll just continue the stories. I want to interview people, and I'll do that. And
Mhm.
then I started thinking, I need to, this is taking on a different life, and I wanted to represent, like, what is it about lions that make them capable of getting through a crisis like this. And
Mhm.
when you think of resilience, that kind of, you want to be resilient and get back to where you were. When you have an
Mhm.
injury or something, you want to be resilient, train, get back so you can be at the level that you were at before. And so I wanted to look at the people, and so resilience seemed to make sense. So I wanted resilience there. And then it was like, well, the organization changed. Things
Mhm.
happened to make the organization ready, a hardier kind of organization now, because now we have one of the people I interviewed who said that he felt that the pandemic thrust Lions ahead a decade in terms of acceptance of
Ooh.
technology, because
Yeah.
everybody had to figure it out. And so
Yeah.
now people know how to do it. And so it's
Mhm.
no big thing. They still prefer to meet in person, but they can do a Zoom meeting. So
Yeah.
the idea of resilience then, so I had these competing things. I was going like, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? And what do I want? And then I thought, okay, I want people who are in academia, my discipline, to understand resilience and renewal are key words in organizational learning. How
Mhm.
do we learn as an organization and move through a crisis? So I wanted to appeal to them. And then the subtitle, The Story of Lions International in the Crisis of COVID-19, that's my focus on the Lions. I want Lions
Great.
to know this is their story
Mhm.
and they can be proud of it and inspired that they were part of the success of this organization getting through it. And so then if you look at the book title, the cover, having dark clouds represents the crisis, and being
Mhm.
able to be resilient is like to rise above it. And then the
Great.
renewal is kind of like the changed landscape. And so I hope that that kind of inspirational moment comes through and people can say, ah, that's a positive. It's an uplifting story. You know, COVID was such a terrible, terrible crisis. It took, you know, millions of lives around the world. Lions died. It affected I can't, every community everywhere. I can't think of a place where someone didn't have an experience of someone who contracted COVID and maybe died because of COVID. And
Yeah.
and so that some people don't want to talk about COVID. They don't want to think about COVID. But I think 5 years out is a good time to reflect on what it was, what happened, and how we got through it. And one of
Yeah.
the people I interviewed from India shared with me that during the crisis, she didn't have time to think about how it was affecting her. She
Mm,
was thinking about what was going on around it. And one of the staff members said the same thing almost directly, that he was spending so much time worrying about his family and his staff members. He was a division head, that he said, I didn't think about how it was affecting me. So when I asked questions, my first 6 questions were, how did the pandemic affect you? What changes did you make in your life? How did it, you know, I asked a series of questions that kind of
yeah.
focused on that, which got them back into that time in their minds where they were able to kind of, okay, this is what was going on. You know, my wife was in the living room at the or dining room table, and I was in the bedroom. My kids were in their rooms going to school. We all were using this, you know, same system. And
Mhm.
so they talked about that. But then it was like, well, how did this affect your work and all of those
Yeah.
things? So it reopened it. And she said, I really appreciate the opportunity to reflect now
Mhm.
because it helps me to realize what I was able to do and how I was able to get through it. So it's kind of a
Yeah.
positive outcome. So I hope people will read it with the idea that it's a positive end. I mean, Nick
Yeah.
Resilience
Yeah.
International got through this crisis, and people have died, and but the organization and its mission to serve the world continues.
Yeah.
And that's what I want historians 100 years from now to look back at this time, and if they're wondering what happened, that they can pick up a copy of my book and they can look at it and say, well, here's how one organization got through it and stayed true to their mission and made a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the way your book is, it obviously is the history of, Lions International as far as the members and how, you guys went through the pandemic and how it affected your organization. But it's for potential leaders, people that are interested in leading an organization or just being a leader or just successful in general. So yeah, I like the way that you made that a focus of your book as well.
Thank you.
So would you say that the pandemic permanently changed how Lions International operates, or do you think is it a new normal, or are you more, would you say the organization is more like in its older ways as far as getting together like more in person, or what would you say?
I would say that it's a new normal. I
Okay.
mean, I think that
Yeah.
what's happened is that there are vestiges from the past, like there are still like conventions where people come together and they do business and they, you know, present reports and they do training and things like that. So I think that there are the things that need to be done and that people enjoy doing. But an example is that when we went into COVID, we did not have a constitutional provision for electing officers if it wasn't in person.
Church. Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
so when we got to, it was March of 2020, we were preparing to go to Singapore for our international convention to elect the next president.
Oh
They
boy.
realized that we were not going to be able to do that and the convention had to be canceled. There was no constitutional provision to enable us to elect our next officer and our next international board. And so the decision was made to extend the term for 1 term for our international officers and for the board. So for the first time there, well, we have one president, Jung Yul Choi, who I interviewed, who is the only president of Lions for 2 years. All the rest
Mhm.
have been single years because that's always been done. And we had always had a convention except for 1945 at the end of World War II. We did not have a convention, but we've always had one. So when they canceled that convention, it was like we have to do something about this. And so by the next year, they had put in effect a mechanism where they could do a secure vote. And even though the next convention was also done remotely, they didn't cancel it. They did it remotely out of a studio. They had a
Mhm.
mechanism so that official delegates could go into the secure system and vote, and they were able to then change the Constitution. So now we have that. So I think Lions have made adjustments. I think that like now a lot of our training is done online, and then we bring them together for one final big session where they can interact with each other. So we've found these new models, and I believe that we are still in this state of renewal where we're thinking, how can we make this better?
Mhm.
And where do we go from here? That's the characteristic of renewal is you're going forward. You're not
Mhm.
retrospective, you're prospective. You're looking ahead to
Yeah.
what is coming in the future.
Okay. And so when did you start writing your book, or when did you realize you wanted to publish this particular book?
Well, I had a goal to publish it faster than I ended up publishing it. When I started in 2022. I was just coming out of the pandemic, and of course, as the director of the school, our school is one of the largest units at the University of Central Florida. We have about 4,000 undergraduate students, and we have five graduate programs, eight undergraduate programs. We're on two campuses, 100 employees. It's a lot of work. So I was
Yeah.
struggling to get it
Mhm.
written. And
Yeah, I bet.
I was able to get the interviews done for the most part in 2022 and a little in 2023. I
Mhm.
ended up wanting to get a couple of additional people, which I did in as I was finishing the book. I wanted one other perspective, so I interviewed someone, but most of it was done early, and I wanted to get it done. It ends up that it was pretty much done it last summer, and then
Okay.
I was able to put it into the process for editing and review and all the things that go into making sure it's appropriate,
Yeah.
right for publication, and it was
Okay.
cleared in February. So my goal was to try to get it done within 5 years of the
Mhm.
pandemic, and I was able to do that. And actually, I have a journalist friend who told me that you couldn't have picked a better time because a 5 year retrospective is what journalists like to do when they get 5 years out from something. They like to look back at it and comment on it. So he said that
Oh,
in some ways this was really good timing because it's far enough away so that people aren't still really experiencing the most harmful effects of it, but it's
right.
close enough that people who are involved in it, the people who I interviewed were involved in it. They were the
Mhm.
ones who were there during the pandemic of
Yeah.
2020, 2021. And so that makes it really, from a scholarly perspective,
Good timing.
you can't get into the decision-making people to be able to get this information. So I feel from a quality perspective that it really shines some light on what was happening and how it was managed.
Yeah, yeah. And so, is there a particular part of your book that you enjoyed writing the most?
Writing the most. I think that I one of the areas that I really wanted to make sure I got the story right was the story about the grassroots lions who were the tech people who did this, because
Okay.
there were, it was, headquarters provided, the framework. This is what was going on in Oak Brook, Illinois. And the
Hmm.
executive officers were from all over the world, and they kind of had their bigger perspectives that I understood.
Hmm.
The grassroots lions were individuals who kind of were, in some ways, I don't want to say mavericks, but they were like innovators, and they would
Hmm.
do things without. being asked to do it. So it's like, okay,
Yeah.
let's do this. Let's create Lions Virtual as a platform where we can be doing things. And people started coming to that. And those have remained. But
Oh,
I wanted
nice.
to make sure I had the sequence correct. So
Oh,
I interviewed them each once. And then I called them back again when I was finally writing it to say, okay, here's what
yeah.
I've written. Does this match what you remember it to be? And they said, yes, that was it. Or they clarified, no, yes. And so I really enjoyed that. And it was the most, challenging and kind of most time consuming because I wanted to get the story right.
Okay.
And I
Yeah.
feel really good about that chapter. Another piece that I really enjoyed, and it kind of came together serendipitously at the end. And that is, I had written the opening section, I talk about days that we will never forget. And I use an example of 9/11 as a day that I can remember where I was. On that day, I remember everything about that day, and I was in North Dakota. So, I mean, I was away from New York, but I just remember that day as a day that kind of is a place. And that's in the opening section of the book is, and the pandemic was another one of those when the
Yeah.
borders, when everything closed, that was another day I remember where I was when I got the message, don't come into the office on Monday, get ready to work remotely. And
Mhm.
that's what we did on
Mhm.
March 17th. Remember that date?
Mhm.
Well, it turns out that in the end, there was a past international president, Al Brandel, who was in New York, who was from New York, and he was a part of the New York detectives. His background is in criminal justice, and he was a past president that was active just before when I was a district governor. So I got to know him, and I was going through the records and discovered that the last official event that Lions hosted before the pandemic was Lions Day at the UN. They have a day every year. I don't know if you know, the Lions were invited to be part of the group that wrote the charter document for the United Nations. Because of our philanthropic work in the world, we were an invited group. So since
Oh, wow.
1945, Lions have been connected with the United Nations. So every year we have an event, Lions Day at the United Nations, where we bring people together. We talk about, sustainability and global goals. We recognize a peace poster winner and an essay winner who are young people. So it's kind of a special day. Well, the last event we held was that first weekend in March before the pandemic, and he was in charge of that event. And he recalled, like, here's, we didn't really, we knew things were going on, but we decided to hold the event. We got hand sanitizer. We went to Dwayne Reed's and got hand sanitizer so we could do that, but nobody got sick as far as we know. But we had to decide, what are we going to do next year? And so he
Mhm.
talked to me about that, and it seemed like such a good connection because it was New York, and
Yeah.
it just
Yeah.
kind of came back to the last event. And he recalled like how they had to make decisions about how they were going to keep that going forward, but they did have a Lions Day at the UN in 2021. It was televised, and he said that's probably the best one we've ever had because we worked so hard to do it.
Oh,
but
yeah,
but
I bet.
that came together at the end, and so it was just one of those aha moments. Like, I was so grateful for that end because it kind of tied the book together in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
That was, Lions are going to keep going.
Yeah.
Lions are going to be here for 500 years.
Yeah.
There are going to be people who are not political, not religious, not economic, not military. They are people that want to make the world a better place, and there are going to be lions. And this is the story of that organization at its 107th year of existence.
Oh, nice. And did you have was there a difficult part of your writing process looking back?
Yes, toward the beginning, I had so much information, and
Oh, yeah.
I went through 4 or 5 different ways of organizing data. Like, one of the things I did is, I had 52 people, and I asked them essentially the same group batch of questions because that's,
Right. Yeah.
we have to get approval from the university to interview people to respect their rights and do all of that. So you send in
Yeah.
your list of questions. So I had my list of questions and I asked them. So the first thing I did is I tried to organize the interviews by question. So I take
Mhm.
everybody's answer to question one, and I got all of that compiled. And I said, this is still too much information. This isn't going to work. So I have a big batch of that I worked on. I'm a reasonable keyboard operator, so I was typing away, transcribing, cutting and pasting. Then the second iteration, I looked like, okay, I'm going to go by level of leadership. And so I took
Mhm.
all the officers and all the staff and that kind of stuff. So I broke it down that way and then looked at questions. It was just a challenge to get all of that information condensed into a way that made sense. And
Mm.
so I worked through that, but I think by doing those different steps, what it helped me to do was to refine my thinking about what I really wanted to do. And,
Mm.
I want to kind of look at the idea of what was the pandemic and how did it affect people and what are the characteristics of resilience and renewal. And then as I came along, I decided all of a sudden there were like principles. Like this is a principle of renewal, number one. This is what, I started coming up with headings like this is
Okay.
something that I'm observing. And now here are all of the ways that was shown. And so I came up with this master list of 5 different propositions that are generally characteristic, and one was about the officers, and one was about the staff, and one was about the clubs and their
Mhm.
level, and one was about, so I was able to say these were the principles of renewal, and that helped me then to organize so that each of the chapters has a principle that reflects what was going on with that group. And so that helped me then to organize it. But the challenge of it was amount of information. And like I said, I want it to be academic enough so that it shows the quality of the research that I did, but written for people who weren't lions so they'd understand what was going on and learn something from it. And so I'm hopeful that was my goal. And I think that was as as a as a scholar, you spend a lot of time struggling, like, how are you going to put this forward? And you finally have to say, all right, I'm going to make an argument. This is my argument, and people can
Mhm.
disagree with it. They might not, look at it the same way, but I
Mhm.
have my perspective, and this is
Mhm.
my perspective. And I'm going to try to tell this story in a way that is true to what I want and also meets the objective that I'm trying to reach. And of course, I want to write in a way that makes sense, and I want to write in a way that it's quality.
Yeah.
I can honestly say I did not use AI in the process of writing this book at all.
Me neither.
I didn't ask them to organize the data or to create
Oh
any
gosh.
substance for it. This is me writing.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say that I feel like a lot of writers and authors can look to you for inspiration because a lot of authors that I talk to, they just have this thing called imposter syndrome. And I
Yeah.
don't see that with you at all. And I feel like that's a real inspiration because a lot of authors do have that. And you are obviously saying more of, my perspective matters and, this is my story, this is how I went about it, and, that's the route I took. So
Thank you
that's
very
how I
much.
handle
That's really
that.
nice of you to say.
Yeah.
I do want to say that, being in academia, we talk a lot about the presses that we go to because we want to
Hmm.
make sure we're publishing with, prestigious presses that are,
Yeah.
going to have that recognition. And
Hmm.
and this book is self-published, but it had to be approved. It had to go
Right.
through
Yeah.
a review process.
Hmm.
And I guess I've become more pleased with my decision because I really was able to write the story I wanted to write, and
Yeah.
I had enough pressure from Author House and from, the press to make sure, this is quality writing, quality
Absolutely.
reviews, all of the things that they did. And I think that as I've gone through the book, I pick it up from time to time and just read it. And I start reading,
Yeah.
I read it. And it's I'm proud of it. I'm proud because I think it tells a story.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I'm working to share it. I'm going to be doing some book talks at the International Convention this year. It's
Oh,
actually
cool.
being held in Orlando. And so I'm on the docket to talk about the book and to do some book signings. And I'm
Nice.
hopeful that, that there'll be about 10,000 lions from around the world here. So I'm hoping that,
Oh, that's
you know,
cool.
the thing about the books that I write about lions is that all the proceeds from the book, if there are any, go to Lions Clubs International Foundation. That
Um,
I keep nothing of the proceeds from the sale of the book. Everything is donated because I want this to be this is a service project for me. It's a personal service project to support an organization that means so much to me, and
mhm.
I want to give back in this way.
Well, I think that's so lovely. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. I do just have one last question for
Sure.
you.
Okay.
And that is, what is the number one message that you hope readers get from your book after finishing it? Or what do you hope stays with them after finishing your book?
I hope that they will see that lions matter and that the work of the Lions Clubs, Lions International, is worthwhile, and that making a difference in the world can start with one person. I want
Mhm.
that. I hope that they'll take away that if people find ways to have agency and to keep focused on how are they going to make a difference? How can they
Mhm.
overcome a crisis or a challenge? That if they increase their communication with others and work together and keep focused on a mission or a goal, that they will get through it. And
Mhm.
I use the metaphor often, water around a rock. That when water comes to a rock, it doesn't stop. It finds a way around. And I think that's what lions did. They found a way around, relying on their strengths, resilience, in order to
Mhm.
keep going and be renewed and get to their goal.
That's so wonderful. That was very well said.
Thanks.
Well, oh, before I forget, do you have a website or platform where readers
Yes,
can
I
reach
do.
you?
I do. Yes,
Okay.
I do. My website is actually www.stories-of-service.com.
Okay.
Storiesofservice.com with a hyphen in between. And
Okay.
that will take you right to a website that provides more information about the book, about me. You can read a little bit of it if you want.
Okay.
And if you want to order a copy, you can do that too.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Littlefield, for being here today. I appreciate your time. I could tell you put a lot of time and effort into this project and your publication. And we thank you so much for choosing Author House. And we appreciate it and appreciate you sharing your story through us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And like Dr. Littlefield mentioned, you can purchase his book if you liked this topic or found it interesting. You can head to authorhouse.com to purchase. It also is available through Amazon and Barnes& and Noble if you prefer those channels. Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.